more and more of a burden. And oftentimes it's the testers who end up with the, working the weekends to test everything, or creating more defects, or opening more defects than they close, and everything's just a big disaster. And I refer to this as, let's see, how am I going to do this here? I'm not sure if it's still framed. Yeah, there we go. The Agilist dilemma. Because we're picking up Agile, and it's supposed to make our lives a little bit easier, and we're doing the things right. We're doing our, planning at the beginning of the sprint, and we're doing our demos at the end, and we're all that kind of stuff. And what we've done is we've repaired, or we've made incremental and iterative the management of the system that we're developing, but not the actual building of the system we're developing. And so what we need is a set of tools or skills that will resolve the Agilist dilemma, which will also be iterative and incremental. And so what we've done is we take, the problem is that we take our assumptions that we learned in college, or very few of these techniques that I'm going to talk about today are still to this day not taught in college. There are some colleges around that I've heard that are doing it, but for the majority of them are not. And so we have these, upfront waterfallish techniques that we use to build in a Scrum environment, and that's just not working. We do all of our analysis design, and then we do our coding, and then if there's time remaining, which there usually isn't, we do our testing, right? So our customers end up doing our testing for us. And oops, down and then it went up again. And so over time, I've sort of noticed that these are the top 4 engineering practices, whatever you want to call them, that really help. And I'm going to talk a little bit about each one. I'm going to assume that you may not know what these are, or that if you do know what these are, somebody may have given you some misinformation. So I'm going to clarify what each of these 4 is, and then we'll talk about the interrelationship between them. So test-driven development and behavior-driven development are 2 slightly different techniques. Test-driven development is sort of all developer-facing. Behavior-driven development includes the entire team, including product. And the approach is to write a test specification or an example ahead of time, and then build that to completion, and then move on to the next one. So it isn't writing all your tests first, it's writing one test at a time and actually getting it working. And within the scope of whatever it is, if you're working alone or you're working with a pair, you're going to maybe write one test at a time and get it working before you move on to the next one. And in fact, writing one and making it work informs what the next one is. So it's a really good approach for narrowing in on what do we really need to test here, and not trying to be predictive, but being empirical about the process by which we build our software. Test-driven development is, I think, poorly named. What I find when I'm doing it, and I'm doing it well, is that I am already thinking in terms of tests. When I write software, in order to write a line of code, I have to know what it's supposed to do, right? I have to know what the outcomes are. So writing a test has become fairly natural for me, and it can become natural for a team within about a month. It's a just-in-time analysis technique. Basically, you're thinking about, well, given this situation, when I call my code, it's supposed to do these things. What are the side effects? What are the return values? These are the things that I think about when I'm writing my code. So instead of just thinking about it and letting it all sort of boil away, we record it in a test. Okay. Behavior-driven development is using a tool like Cucumber that allows the test scenario to be written in such a way that product people can read it, and they don't have to learn how to write in Java or Ruby or something like that, right? So it's very human readable. And software developers, being humans as well, but they can write their unit tests and test in the programming language that they're used to, And that way they don't have to switch back and forth. So there's advantages to both of these. And in fact, behavior-driven development includes an opportunity to write unit tests in test-driven development when it's beneficial to do so. So that's TDD and BDD. Refactoring, you've probably heard about this. It's essentially reshaping the design of your software without changing the behavior. And that's a really important part. You're redesigning, you're reshaping, you're making better the design. And by making it better, what we mean by that is basically it's more understandable by the team, and it's more maintainable or extensible by the team. So this refactoring is not just, I'm making it pretty, it's just wasting my time making it pretty. It's not rewriting the code. It's effectively making it appropriate to either the behaviors that I just added or the behaviors that I'm about to add to my system. Very important regarding, that's one of the things that people often, well, that's just rewriting code. Why didn't you get it right the first time? Well, if we wanted to get it right the first time, we wouldn't be doing an Agile project, because if we thought that we could design everything up front for 6 months and then deliver something useful, we wouldn't be doing Scrum or extreme programming or whatever. So, okay, continuous integration. This is the notion that when you're working on something, you very frequently push it to the trunk so that it's available to the other people on your team. And you keep your changes very small, and you don't keep any long-lived branches around, so that integration doesn't become a real pain. It's much easier for a team of 10 to integrate, 20 times per day than it is for a team of 10 to integrate once every 6 months. It may sound like there's be a lot of merge conflicts, and that tends not to be the case. Your changes are very small, they're very concise, and also different people are usually working on different parts of the system. So it's fairly painless after a certain period of time, and very powerful. This is the way we communicate, the goodness of our software to others on the team. If I build something that you can use and I check it in and then you can use it, well, then you don't have to rewrite the same thing, which is what happens when people don't integrate continuously. Pairing and mobbing, also known now as ensemble programming. I guess that's the European version. They don't like the term mobbing. So, you might see this change after a while: pairing, mobbing, ensemble. Pairing is two people working on one coding activity. Of course, the arguments about it being wasteful. Two doing the work of one, that's like saying that during surgery we don't need any sort of assistant surgeon. We don't need a co-pilot on our airplanes. Everybody can just work alone, right? It's also seen as inefficient, but in my experience, if let's say Brandon has something he needs to work on, coding task, and I have a coding task to work on, we have two choices. We could either both in parallel work on our coding tasks, or we could both work on his and then both work on mine. And one might think that we'd be much slower if we paired on both of those. And it turns out that that's not the case. It tends to be about the same. Academically, there's been evidence that it is a little bit slower, except that you have to take into consideration that the quality of the code is so much higher when we pair that we usually don't have to go back and fix as much. Those academic studies that suggested that it takes longer to pair also noted that if you take into consideration the amount of time it would take to fix the defects of the lone cowboy programmers, then they lose. So it's not a waste of time, and in fact, it has all sorts of other valuable things. if I'm sitting there alone and I don't know how to accomplish what I set out to accomplish, I might spend, I don't know, a couple hours watching YouTube videos on how to write code in Ruby or something crazy like that. If I've got somebody sitting next to me who happens to have a different complementary skill set to mine, he or she is going to just say, hey, all you need to do is just, whatever, right? And same goes for the opposite direction. There's no senior junior here. It's in fact, one of my favorite stories about pair programming was I had hired somebody who was maybe 2 years out of college, and I explained to him what we were doing, and uh, he went along with it for a while, and he said, how long is this supposed to take us? And I said, I don't know, it's about a 6-month project. And he said, well, why don't we just do at the time this was 2003, so he says, why don't we just do an XSLT transformation on this XML? And I'm like, well, one, because I don't know what you're talking about. Right. And so he was an XSLT guy, and what I brought to the table was that I figured out, once we saw how we were going to do the transformation in Java, I figured out a way to unit test it. So we built out and we got it done in I think it was more like 6 weeks instead of 6 months. At his 6-month review, he got the largest raise that company had ever given out ever. So because it was just incredible, and I wouldn't have known. I would have gone on for 6 months if I had hired somebody else. So you just never know. Okay, this is a little weird that I can't see you. Let's see if I can see. Oh yeah, I can see you. Okay, you just can't see me. All right. You know what? I'm going to move that up. Since you can't see me anyway, you won't be able to tell that I'm not looking straight at the camera. So why don't I just do this? Okay, before I go on, has anybody been wanting to go, hey, shake his head or flip me off or anything like that? No, everybody's good. Okay, cool. Haven't made any stupid mistakes, or you're not waving at me going, we can't hear you, you're muted. All right. Okay, so do we have a chat window or anything? Yeah, we do have a chat window. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to, here's all sorts of stuff in the chat window. Garrick's harassing me. Let's see, what are you harassing me about? The word per minute typing test for programmers. Yeah, I had a manager one time who actually said that the best thing that he thought he could do for his developers was to send them to typing school. And I said, if that's your major constraint to developing and delivering value, then you've got bigger problems, buddy. I'm sure I didn't say buddy, but I found a polite way to say it. No. Anyway, so what I'm going to ask you to do now is to vote by don't hit enter. You can type in your vote, but don't hit enter until we say. Okay, so it's all going to come streaming in, and you're not going to affect the other people. What I want you to do is think about the Agilist dilemma, this issue that we're trying to use, waterfall-y approaches to getting Agile-y stuff out the door. And which one of these? Now, these are all very important. I mean, there's 4 out of dozens. There's at least a dozen extreme programming practices, but these are the core 4. So these are all very important. But which one do you suppose I would put in the middle to solve the Agilist's dilemma? Which one of these gets right at the heart of the Agilist's dilemma, and the others support it? So think about that for a moment, and then type it in, but don't hit return. Don't hit enter, whatever the button says, until everybody's had a chance to think about it. Okay, on your marks, get set, go. Yeah. Nice. Is that everybody? Okay. Yeah. It's interesting. I've had a lot of people when I ask this question say continuous integration, and there's no wrong answer, but that is a really strong one. Especially on a larger team, you need to have those changes in the repository um, as frequently as possible. And I've talked with colleagues of mine, and they say, sometimes the question comes up, well, what one practice would you establish on a team if you wanted to make things better? And I've had some colleagues say continuous integration. I know that Arlo Belshi, a friend of mine, would say pairing, because once you're pairing, you have a better chance of fixing any other problems. You can come up with ways to fix other problems. So pairing is a really strong one. And from an Agilist standpoint, I would say that is probably one of the things that I would suggest first is to, more collaboration, more communication. Test-driven development, of course, Brandon knows that I'm a big fan of TDD, so good guess on Brandon's part that I would, I think, test-driven development in a way solves so many problems that teams have that, yeah, good guess. Actually, the one that I would put in the center, I'm still sharing my screen, right? Somebody, yeah, okay. Refactoring. And here's why. Think about what we mean by the Agilist dilemma. We're talking about not being able to change our code, not being able to extend the software to do new things. That's the challenge that we're having. So at the heart, the closest thing that touches is refactoring, or refactoring is the closest thing that touches that. Now, that's not to say that refactoring is the solution, because refactoring by itself needs these other things. It needs test-driven development. It needs test-driven development to create the safety net of tests. Yes, you could say you could write the unit test after, but you know what? Nobody really does. So 20% test coverage is not going to give you what you need in order to refactor confidently and quickly. To confidently and quickly refactor, you need a very extensive safety net of automated and comprehensive tests and fast tests. So TDD is there. By the way, TDD and BDD both, fast tests, very important, fast feedback. BDD is not just taking all of your manual test cases and turning them into Cucumber. That's a step. It's a beneficial step, but it's only going to get you so far. We can talk about that later. So continuous integration, very important for refactoring, because if you're not integrating continuously, you cannot refactor, because if you've got two different long-lived branches and Brandon and I are on one branch and we're doing one set of refactorings, and Garrick and Bren are on the other branch doing another set of refactorings, and then we merge and then we're yelling at each other going, that's a stupid refactor, right? And then we get into a fist fight, which on Zoom is just really unpractical. And, just all heck breaks loose. So continuous integration, very important in order to be able to refactor. Pairing and mobbing, I got to tell you, 35 plus years of software development, whenever I write code by myself, it usually turns out to look like garbage. All the object-oriented training in the world, all the experience in the world, and I sometimes have to write a little bit of code so that I can present it at a class. And in the old days when I used PowerPoint, I would project up my clever code onto the thing, and somebody would raise their hand and go, I don't understand. And that's the key for me, is that if somebody else doesn't understand, I have not written good code. It's not that they're an idiot. It's because my code is not understandable, right? So solution, pairing, mobbing, Mobbing, I didn't really go into too much detail, is actually pretty much the whole team, or at least the people who need to be involved in delivery, working together, right, to build the product. So that also, not only is it better software design, it's also better user experience design. It's more understanding, fewer misunderstandings about what the software is actually supposed to do. When you have a product person sitting with you and a tester, writing tests, and a developer writing code, uh, right there in front of everybody, it's a pretty powerful tool. So those support each other, and they support refactoring. Some of the things about, so for example, the dotted gray lines, real quick, test-driven development and continuous integration, test-driven development and behavior-driven development create the tests that run the continuous integration server, or if you're doing it manually, you run all the tests. And if a single test that used to pass starts to fail, guess what? You're not going to merge your changes. And this has become automated on a lot of these new tools, where if you break a single unit test, your changes get thrown back in your face, all of them. It's like, nope, sorry, not going to happen, right? Let's see, one of the other ones. So test-driven development and pair programming, I would have to say, I can't separate the two. It's really hard for me to think about. One of the things that happens when you're doing test-driven development is that whenever you write a test, especially at the beginning, you think of 3 more. And if you stop yourself and try to, I don't know, write a little template tests or write it down or something like that, you kind of lose a tiny little bit of context. And it takes that much longer to get back into context. And especially when you get to be a certain age, that context just evaporates into the ether anyway. So in order to stay focused, it's really nice to have somebody else, the navigator, the person who's not at the keyboard, write down, these, you're like, hey, what happens if we're passed in a null and it's the last item in this array? Okay, write that down, right? So that's the navigator's job. The navigator is taking a broader view, a larger perspective, and keeping us on track to get the task completed. Whereas the person typing is focused on typing and and making the test pass and writing the right code. So these 2 roles really support each other. And then pairing and mobbing and continuous integration. I haven't really given that much thought lately, but how would those relate? Let me think about that for a second. Or maybe somebody can pipe up with a suggestion. Continuous integration and pairing and mobbing. Oh, well, one of the things that I've noticed over time is that, let's say, for example, that you create something completely new in your system and you give it a name. And in order to communicate that, you integrate it. Well, like I said, if you're working alone and you write really weird stuff, people are going to see weird stuff in your code and not understand it, and then they'll ignore it. They won't use it, and they'll write their own. And then you get stovepipe solutions where everybody's written their same little. I remember the .com era. Everybody was writing things that built SQL statements. It was like everybody on our team was responsible for writing their own SQL statements to load up their own little objects, and that company went out of business. So anyway, so there we go. We got obviously these are each supporting refactoring, and one of the nice things about it, if you look at this as a 3-dimensional diagram, right? It's like a little pyramid, and refactoring is towards the front. You could spin this around and put any of them at the heart of resolving the Agilist dilemma. So all of your answers were right. It's just a matter of perspective. They all really work well together. And solve the Agilist dilemma. So let's see. Oh, yep. Nope, it's not doing it. What's next? Sorry, I'm going to zoom out slowly because otherwise it makes people seasick a little bit. This is a lot like Prezi. If you've ever used Prezi, only it's dynamic Prezi. Okay, I think that's all I was going to say. So I'll put this up here. I'm going to share the link to this right now in the chat. Apparently, we're also recording, so this whole experience, this wondrous experience, whoops, wait, what's going on? There it goes, is being recorded for you. And I'll probably take that link and put it into the Miro board at some point to like a next steps kind of thing. So here's my contact information. You'll be able to get to that through the Miro board. And with that, I am going to stop sharing unless it becomes necessary, if I can figure out how. I think it's this button. And how do we want to do questions?
Up to you, Rob, if you want to just have people, speak them out, or we can have people raise their hand in Teams and we can call on people.
Oh, that'd be good. The raising hands things. How many people do we have? Just maybe about a dozen?
I think about a dozen, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's not going to be too bad. So if you think something you want to ask, you can either raise your hand or maybe drop it into the chat, whichever you feel more comfortable with. And maybe Brandon, you can try to look for raised hands while I play with the window here and try to get it so that I'm not looking away. Here we go. Now I can look right at the camera-ish.
All right. I see Bren. Go for it, Bren.
Yeah. So I have an advantage that I actually teach and I'm in charge of curriculum at a university. And one of your opening statements was a lot of universities are not doing this kind of stuff. So have you seen any of this, what you just discussed, implemented? Because right now I just have an emphasis in this kind of stuff, but I would love to eventually get it as a full bachelor's degree.
Yeah.
And one of my colleagues talked about, introducing test development, TDD, and I hadn't really heard about the behavioral stuff, but boy, that seems like that'd be a phenomenal class to stick in, because we do, just the standard kind of behavioral stuff, but we talk a ton about mindsets. And so if you had any kind of documentation that would sort of maybe be a class kind of thing, I would love that, because then I can pitch it and say, hey, I would like to do a class in this and a class in this. And because we have to present it so far in advance, right? That, so this is really cool.
Well, to a couple of things I could recommend that we can do, and you should probably go ahead and contact me. Okay. Email is probably the best way. And what I'll do is, one of the things I can do is share the outlines to. I have a test-driven development course. I have a behavior-driven development course.
Nice.
And I can share the outlines for those.
Right.
I also do certified Scrum developer, which is sort of around all four of the core four. So that's like a broad but not real deep.
Right.
And then test-driven development and behavior-driven development are deep, deep immersive things. And that's one of the things I can do.
Okay.
And I'm more than happy to do that. I don't know what condition my my BDD outline is in right now, but the TDD one has been written over and over again for so many times that it's in pretty good shape.
Right.
The other thing that I'm doing, and this is a great time for me to pitch my book that doesn't exist yet, but hopefully the book is coming out at the end of this year or early next year, and the topic is test-driven development, and with a focus on the mindset. And the focus is so much on the mindset and the techniques and the approach as a process that it's sort of language agnostic. So I've got some JavaScript in there, I've got Java, I've got some C# in there, I'm sure to have some Ruby in there. But the point being, with all those mix, I'm sure somebody's going to criticize me and say, you know, couldn't you have just picked a language? And I'm going to go, well, no, because I wanted to make the point that this is language agnostic, right? And there's like, for example, I just wrote up an example in C# specifically because it has the keyword virtual that has to appear in front of every virtual method. So I'm like, well, I'm going to do that in C# so that it's blatantly obvious what I'm doing. And that sort of thing. And then, of course, I just love Ruby, so I'm going to throw some Ruby in there just because I was pretty impressed with that language. By the way, so to end the pitch of the book, my point being, and I did have one, is that I've been sort of trying to orient it towards being a textbook. So it's got labs, it's got, you know, questions. It's not going to have, you know, a huge like section after every chapter where it asks you questions, and then you have to have the I don't even remember what we used to call it, the copy that has the answers, the instructor's copy of the book. I don't want to do anything quite like that, but I do want to have, you know, questions for people to think about, sort of a summary of the lessons that they may have learned in that chapter, and then also labs. So it could be used as a textbook, and that's, you know, that's kind of my mission in life, is so that people stop writing crappy code. Sorry, apologies, dysfunctional code.
Understand completely. Excellent. I will reach out to you for sure.
Thank you. And Garrick has his hand raised.
Hi, thanks. So I actually want to do a little bit of a quick follow-on about that in terms of universities, or in this case, as things have been structured, at least in the state of Washington, they've dropped all of the communities now from the names of community colleges as of a couple of years ago. And that's in part due to the recognition that they've started to do these wonderful BAAS programs, which are Bachelors of Applied Science. Due to former volunteer work and connections, I finally gave in to an old colleague's request, and for the past few months, I've been an adjunct instructor at Green River's Bachelor of Applied Science program in software development, and awesome. The students are doing their capstone course. So you are right in that a number of these things aren't getting exposure directly. We're still trying to figure out literally how to work that in. Like I said, I'm not a full-time, I'm an adjunct. COVID has kind of allowed me to shift my hours and step out and participating in terms of warping new minds in the software world. But there's been some of the things that I've been happy to focus on in terms of explaining to them how pairing and mobbing works. I've done the wonderful world of I'm going to show you TDD, and done FizzBuzz from just starting with the test, and given the happy laziness of forcing the IDE to do all the hard work because I'm a good lazy programmer, and having the light bulbs go on. But it's always these things where it's bits and pieces and it's hard to piece together. And I had students ask me specifically, and I finally gave in and put in my own efforts to say, well, you know, you talk about all this good other sorts of testing, and you talk about unit testing and what's an integration test and what's a UI test. And so I finally actually put my money where my mouth is and threw up on my not very well used GitHub repository a Spring Boot opinionated example that shows off, here are the unit tests. They just use RAM and CPU. Here's an integration test. It spins up a Docker container and talks to the actual Postgres. Ooh. And then here is the UI test that spins up the whole stack end-to-end, talking to a test database, a different one, with test data in it and fires up a little test container with Chrome and goes through, and it's a dead ugly UI. That's part of the point. And to be honest, in terms of being able to get things into university, I would love to take a 1-week core XP course and use something like this as an 8-hour-a-day lab. I don't know how to do it. It would be spring. It would be something that you could do as a special courses class, like over a spring break or a winter break, and get them in 8 hours a day in the lab and give this a starting point. Students also, as I've learned through, they're needing better exposure with Git. For better or worse, when Linus went out and created Git, it was great, but it was designed to solve his problems. You don't trust people, and so you have to pull things in, and you have to deal with more merges than you would if you just had a Subversion server. So all those little bits and pieces of stuff. I was trying to remember the name. Was it Bren that I was following on? Feel free to contact me. Garrick,
that would be fantastic. I'm actually going to be moving back to Washington State in about a year.
Oh, great. That's my personal email. So
awesome.
Feel free to contact me, and I can talk about the program and what we've done. That capstone is also run with Scrum. The students go through, they do 1-week iterations. They have outside customers, as it were. We're trying to figure out the product owner role. That's a bit of a problem. But they go through and they do demos. In fact, later on today, my teams are doing another demos, and they do these 2 10-week courses. It's 26 weeks of doing project work for actual customers by the time they're done. So
nice.
There's some hope.
Very cool. All right. I don't see any other hands up. Oh, I spoke too soon.
Kevin.
Hey, Rob. Do you have any suggestions on how to get some developers paired up that might be kind of hesitant to start pairing?
Let's see. Yeah, I think that the biggest challenge is the social challenge with pairing. The biggest challenge is I don't feel comfortable having somebody looking over my shoulder. I don't have, and secretly, I don't have confidence in my abilities sometimes is the thing. I think that was probably when I first started out with pair programming, I was like, well, do I really know this stuff? Am I really going to be able to do this? Or do I spend so much time trying to figure out what I'm doing that I'm going to annoy somebody? I like to say that pair programming is not a very formal practice. It's a very informal practice. The 2 P's in pair programming are all lowercase, and so it's almost like I don't want to say the words around a team. I want to just suggest that, oh, you're having a little bit of trouble with that. So and so over here is an expert on optimizing SQL database queries. How about if you sit down with him, and they'll do their whole, well, I'll look over your stuff, or I'll do the code review, and just say, hey, if you do that, we'll just consider it reviewed already. So if you sit together and work on a tough problem, then maybe it'll be code reviewed. The other thing is, one thing Bob Hartman once said, he suggested, is that if you're working on fixing a defect, since it was obviously a challenging problem for somebody at the beginning, that they work together on the defect. And that also, that takes some of the burden off of the person who's been identified as the person who broke it. There's a lot of really interesting side effects to pairing. Is that, for one thing, when we work alone, we have this sort of weird pride in our code, and that gets in our way, because then we're like, if somebody insults it or suggests that it's not perfect, then we're perfect, we're a little bit insulted. When we work together, it feels the sting is taken away. There's not a whole lot of sting, because if 2 of us are doing it and we agreed that we did it right and we did it well, it's kind of hard for anybody to come up and say, no, I don't like your code. It's like, well, it's our code and we don't like your code or whatever it is. So, Garrick, let's see what Garrick said, take the pressure off by requiring 1-day workshop for pairing in TDD. Is that an answer to this question?
Yes,
Yeah.
actually, had success with it. Company that I was doing some consulting for, and other folks that I know, just taking liberally stealing the Global Day of Code Retreat model and running with it, because you are outside of work. You are not working on anything that's even remotely considered production. And of course, the fun thing in terms of Code Retreat, if you've ever gone through and done it, you're not going to get to the problem. And so it's all about communication. It's all about practicing problem solving. And by the time you've gone through, the whole structure is spoiler alert, you're supposed to solve Conway's Game of Life, but you've only got about 40, 50 minutes to do it. And that's not enough time to implement all the rules. And so by the time you're done, you pair up with someone, you work on it, you pick some of the rules, and then you erase it, you throw it away. And then everyone talks about what they learned, and then you shuffle pairs. And so it's all about focusing, about thinking about problem solving, thinking about TDD, thinking about good pairing practices, thinking about good rules of code design, and that's it. And it's a nice sort of safe environment. And people that can be, uncomfortable or not comfortable with, if they're not comfortable with someone, they only have to sit next to them for the next 40 minutes or so. You can throw in different languages, you can do all sorts of stuff. And it's kind of a nice, safe way to leverage those aspects without putting production work on the line, without actually having it being in a work environment, because at that point, you're just hosting that exercise.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good recommendation, because that's what I often tell the clients is that we're the purpose of the course is not only to teach them these practices, but to teach them these practices in a way that they can focus on the practices and not have to focus on their own code. So it's a safe environment where we're not delivering on your PBIs. The other thing is you mentioned something about it's out of work. It's definitely out of band work. I would recommend doing it during the workday. Okay, because some people, hey, you're gonna get together on a weekend and you're gonna spend a weekend with your coworkers and do this thing, and people are like, no, I'm not. I don't want to.
That's the pull of the actual goal of Code Retreat. And in this case, my suggestion is just steal it as a part of your engineering training. Literally, you can take that workshop and just run it through with your developers and say, we're going to work on getting comfortable with some of these ideas. Put your email aside. You're getting paid for this. Let's dive in and take it seriously.
The other thing that I often recommend that I'll throw out there is that if your sprints are short enough, a week or two, you can do anything like your like it was the thing that you did, and try it, and then come back to it at the retrospective. So for example, okay, so this sprint, this 1 or 2 week sprint, we're going to pair. We're going to pair on everything. We're going to pair all the time. And then at the retro, and like, let's not hear any guff about it for that 2 week period. And then at the retrospective, if you just hate it, you can tell us you just hate it. And oftentimes people don't hate it as much as they thought they would.
Okay, thank you.
Hope that helps. Yeah. And we lost a couple, or people said that they had some network issues.
Yeah, we lost one person to that, unfortunately.
Okay.
What else? Are there other questions? Anything you want Rob to probe further in any of the the topics he introduced, or I don't know, kind of open floor here.
It doesn't even have to do with the core 4 if you want to check in on something else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. or we can get a few minutes of our lives back. Entirely up to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment. I did a pair program remotely, and that was pretty cool because you could actually have somebody typing. They had their Zoom window up, and it was fantastic because you could just basically go through and do that. So I'm actually creating a company in my spare time, and I had one of my students graduate, and so he didn't have a job yet, so we spent 6 months pair programming, and it was absolutely phenomenal because he didn't necessarily know what to do, but boy, it was really quick, and we would just talk about all the things you suggested, where it ended up being our code and not just his code,
Right.
and that was fantastic. And then since I worked full time, and he could then take and refine and do all those other kinds of things because I just could never get to it. But the best part was doing the pair stuff.
Yeah, that reminded me. I wanted to throw this. I'm going to put a link out here. If you are doing remote pairing or remote mobbing, in fact, this little shell script. Yeah, Garrick just put out the shell script, and I think those are actually exactly the same thing.
Same thing.
Although mob shell might be just pointing to the first repository there, which has the most activity if you look at that page. And it's this simple little shell script that commits to a specific branch, which I think they hold it off as a branch until they're ready to actually commit. But during the session, during the mobbing session, it's this like temporary branch that they're using to move the code changes to each of the new drivers. And it also has a built-in timer, I think. So the thing with mobbing is that you don't want to be forcing the driver to spend, all the time being the driver. And in fact, it's really interesting. I was teaching a refactoring and software design course to a particular organization that did mobbing as a practice. And during the course, one team decided that they were going to reduce the amount of time that they drove to a minute, just 1 minute. And they said, can you imagine what this is going to be like? And they reported back and said that one of the positive things was that since there was like a team of 5, since you know that you're going to be driving in 5 minutes, you never take your eyes off of the code. You're constantly focused. So all 5 of them were constantly focused on what was going on. And I thought that was very interesting. But you don't need to go that extreme. But you don't also want to like make somebody type for 20 minutes. That's a little bit much.
Have you guys ever expanded that kind of approach to other positions within a Scrum team to like say QA or anything like mobbing for testing?
Oh, mobbing does include the entire team. And in fact, the testing activity and the development activity and even, analysis, all of these things on a mob team are effectively done together and also done sort of as simultaneously as possible. So for example, one of the things that I often see teams do, and this has been happening a lot after I teach a BDD course, and also, mostly the BDD course, is that after the BDD course, teams are mobbing and doing behavior-driven development. And so what they end up doing, behavior-driven development is kind of like testing. It's like just-in-time analysis, just-in-time testing, just-in-time software development, and ergo, the entire ball of wax is basically reduced into a very, very fast, like 5 or 10 minute cycle. And so, mobbing is including everybody who's there that day. Testers, tester roles tend to be the ones that change the most when we go from a traditional waterfallish approach to an agile approach. I think people miss out on understanding that it's a very big challenge, because what they're essentially doing is they're becoming just-in-time business analysts. And if you think about it, a test scenario is a specification It's like we used to use use cases. Preconditions, actions, postconditions. It's like a tiny little use case. It's a given when then. It's a scenario. It's a whatever you want to call it. It's the same thing that they've always been doing. So they want to work on writing good tests. It's all the same.
Cool. Hey, well, let's go ahead and wrap up here because we're just about at the top of the hour. But just wanted to say thanks again to Rob for giving us some of his time today. And I think the chat has been awesome. We've gotten some good resources as well of places to look and maybe ways to continue that conversation in the future. I will try to capture the chat from this and make that available to everybody if I can figure out a way to do that. And then also we should have the recording available on the agilecoloradosprings.com site fairly soon. Again, I got to find out. This is my first time running it off of Teams, so I got to go locate where that recording is, but I will try to make that available to everybody. And you all should have the link to Rob's presentation with his contact info as well. So yeah, I would encourage you to keep the conversation going. And Rob, I'll give you the last word.
Oh, I'll just say thank you all for inviting me and having me talk today. It's been a pleasure. Good to see you. And if the recording doesn't work out, we'll just do it over again.
Sounds
Thanks.
good. All right, everybody for being here. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Rob.
Bye.